Before we begin today, I want to recognize an honored guest. The Reverend Darrell Meyer was a second pastor of StoneBridge Community Church when it was known as Simi Valley Presbyterian Church. Reverend Meyer, would you please stand so we could recognize you and thank you. And it's great to see so many old friends and familiar faces today. And it's just great today as we celebrate our 50th anniversary as a church family. 1963 was really an amazing year for a lot of reasons. In June of that year, JFK stood before a crowd of 250,000 people at the Berlin Wall and delivered his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech. That August, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and looked out over a crowd that was gathered at the reflecting pool there and inspired a generation who desperately needed to hear his message in which he said, "I have a dream." In the world of sports, Pernell Jones that year won the Indy 500. Pete Rose was Rookie of the Year. The LA Dodgers swept the World Series against the New York Yankees, who had won the two series before that, with Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale pitching against the likes of Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford, Hector Lopez, and Stan the Big Hurt Williams. Lawrence of Arabia was Picture of the Year. The Dick Van Dyke Show grabbed the Emmy. Peter, Paul, and Mary won Record of the Year for their recording of the Pete Seeger song, "If I Have Had a Hammer." If you turned on the radio that year, you would likely hear Johnny Cash singing "Ring of Fire." You may notice I dress like Johnny today. The Beach Boys were singing "Surfin' USA." Surf City by Jan and Dean, Wipe Out by the Safaris, shout out to Pastor Jonathan, the other surfers here. Alan Sherman was at the top of the charts with Hello Mutta, Hello Fata. And there was a guy once known as Little Stevie Wonder who had just released his first hit song, Fingertips Part 2. The number one song of the summer of '63 was a song that was surprisingly sung solely in Japanese. Kyu Sakamoto's Sukiyaki. The novelty song of the summer was The Martian Hop, the TV program My Favorite Martian. You put those two together and it reminds us that we were deep in the space race, a fact not lost on a lot of folks at Rocketdyne, who were testing the rocket engines that later in that decade would send man to the moon. Across the pond, a little band called the Beatles had already made a name for themselves, as a curious Ed Sullivan noted whilst trying to fly out of Heathrow Airport, where a crowd of screaming girls was welcoming the boys back. They were welcoming the boys back from a tour of Sweden. They hadn't yet hit the stage of the Ed Sullivan Show in America. That would come a couple of months later. In England, it was the year of the Great Train Robbery. It was the year of Sean Connery's Dr. No, and it was the year we were introduced to the Doctor, Time Lord Doctor Who. Closer to home, Santa Susana's first traffic light had just been installed right down the street. The first traffic light in Simi Valley had just been installed at the corner of Tapo Street and Los Angeles Avenue. There was a groundbreaking ceremony for this new hospital that was coming to town, the Simi Valley Adventist Hospital. Authorities had just approved a new community college that would come to be called Moore Park College. And 4,000 people attended the grand opening of the drive-in theater just west of town. I miss it. That was 1963, the year the Presbytery of Santa Barbara sent Fred Willis and his wife Winnie from First Church Santa Barbara to Simi Valley to start a church. The 3+ acre property, 3 acres, purchased for $43,500, had 2 houses, a little garage, a horse corral, and a world of weeds. Fred and Winnie lived in the front house. That house is still standing. It's the one right in the front when you come into church. In the back house, which used to stand on the location of our current Family Life Center, about where my office is actually, 35 people jammed into the living room and kitchen of that house for the first worship service. Grace Hughes was telling me the other day that Dr. Will's son, Bill, who was really kind of a big guy, he was like 6 feet plus, had built the pulpit, forgetting to factor in the reality that his dad was a full foot shorter than him. So when Dr. Will stepped up to the pulpit to deliver his very first message, it was one of these. He totally disappeared, and so he has to wrestle this thing back to a hearth. He climbs up on the hearth and then looks out over folks after that. The second service was held in the garage. It was held in the garage to accommodate the growing congregation. That garage, by the way, was later modified. It became our first sanctuary. It acquired a little steeple. It was moved from its location, eventually came to be called Will's Chapel. And we enjoy that facility today. As you all know, the most historic event of 1963 was a tragic one, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. Exactly 1 month later to the day, our congregation was officially chartered. Dr. Wills was installed as our first pastor, and our first elders and deacons were ordained and installed. So today, one of the things that we want to do as we gather together as a community of faith is to celebrate our history. As part of that celebration, I would like to take a moment to recognize 3 people who are with us today who were charter members of Simi Valley Presbyterian Church. They are Grace Hughes, Wes Shipway, and Rosemary Herzig. Would you guys please stand? Excellent. Stay standing. I want you guys to stay standing, okay? Now, of course, you guys stay up, okay? The church continued to grow, and we got the likes, like the Sadlers and all these other. So I would like to ask if you joined the church within the first 10 years, from 1963 to 73, or served as its pastor, would you also please stand? And we owe a debt of gratitude to these guys as well. So I would like you to stay standing too, and this is so mean. It's because it's the oldest people I'm making you stand the longest. But in the Gospel of John, I want to frame this theologically and biblically here. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is talking with a group of his disciples. One of the things he's doing, it's harvest time. And he asks his disciples, look around. And they look around, and he says, look at the fields. And he comments on how they are ripe with harvest. And then he says this, others have done the hard work. You have reaped the benefit of their labor. And that's absolutely true of you guys. And we will be forever and eternally, and I mean that quite literally, eternally grateful for what you have done here. It's true for every one of us who are here today. A lot of us are latecomers. We did not build the worship center that we meet in. You guys did. We didn't start the Sunday school or launch the youth program. All we did was show up. All the stuff that we enjoy and benefit are ours today because other people made it possible. And we do owe these charter and these pioneer members a huge debt of gratitude. Now, of course, other people built on the foundation that they laid. So if you joined the church within the first 20 years from 1963 to 83, would you please stand up? Trittenbach, all right. Excellent. And I do want to point out to you, Matt Trittenbach is the son of Dave Trittenbach, who was the pastor that I believe followed Daryl. Is that correct? That is so awesome. Okay, the next, if you join in the first 30 years, then from 1963 to 1993, that's the period in which I showed up. Would you please stand? Very cool. Okay, the first 40 years, 1963 to 2003. Would you stand up? And finally, just so you won't feel weird, everybody else stand up. All right. Okay, now I'm going to torture you guys. I still want the 3 charter members to stay standing. Everybody else sit down again. And I want you to think about this. We are here today because of something that began with these 3 folks and those that they knew. And we are really grateful. You can sit down now. Thank you. And by the way, I'm really being mean to Grace Hughes because she just had like all this surgery and she's standing up and she's awesome. That's what you get for showing up to church so quick afterwards, Grace. Now, as many, if not most of you know, just a autobiographical thing here, I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't. So when I look at the church, I don't really look at it the way a lot of other people do. I don't see it the way a lot of other people do. When I look at the church, and maybe it's because the way I came to Christ, became a believer, started going to church, is because of an outreach in my community for people that weren't really involved in churches. When I think of the church, I see a movement that began with Jesus. And I see a place of welcome. And I see lives being changed. And I see marriages being launched and marriages that are being mended and grieving people being comforted and unhealthy habits being broken. I see people growing in their understanding of themselves, their understanding of one another, their understanding of God. I see people serving, and I see people finding hope. And I see crazy generosity. Crazy generosity. People being generous with their times, but also, folks, week after week and month after month and year after year and decade after decade, giving, many of them giving the first 10 of what they make or more so that they can make a difference in people's lives. And that's remarkable. And you never hear about it. But it's what undergirds our congregation. I see the church as the only institution in the world that exists, for the most part, for the benefit and blessing of people who don't yet belong to it. Where did this movement begin? Where does this mission that we're involved in come from? Well, it really all goes back to Jesus, who said, as the Father sent me, so I send you. As the Father sent me, so I send you. The word that's actually translated church in the New Testament is the word ecclesia. It's where we get the word ecclesiastical and this sort of thing. The word itself, translated church, actually means sent out, like sent out on a mission. The thing is, how do you keep a group of people who are so incredibly different? I mean, a lot of people who aren't involved in the church think that Christians are all the same. That's because they're on the outside looking in. I mean, what a mixed bag, tossed salad collection of weird, unique, remarkable people. How do you keep a group of people who are so incredibly different? People of different ages, different interests, different backgrounds, different political opinions, different musical tastes. How do you keep people together like that for decades? And all focused on this mission. Somebody said that 100 pianos that are tuned to the same tuning fork will automatically be tuned to one another. And you know what? When our hearts are in tune with the heart of Jesus, in my judgment, if anyone had a heart whose heart we would want to emulate, it would be Jesus. When our hearts are in tune with the heart of Jesus, we are automatically in tune with one another. So today, we not only celebrate our 50-year history, we demonstrate our unity. Now, we're not going to agree on absolutely everything. Bob Wiley in the movie, What About Bob, makes a powerful point when he says, some people are going to like Neil Diamond and some people aren't. And that's true for our congregation. Sweet Caroline. Okay, that was the Neil Diamond lovers, right? Some like Neil, some don't. But we do agree on what is essential, that people matter to God. And not only do people matter to God, they matter to us. We believe that everyone needs grace. We all need grace. We believe, we agree that God is love. And we believe that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever would believe in him, anybody, would not perish but have eternal life. For God sent his Son into the world not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. Which means Jesus didn't come to rub our sin in. He came to rub it out. He didn't come to find fault with us. He came to offer us forgiveness and healing and hope. He didn't come to put us down. He came to lift us up and live in us and work through us to the glory of God the Father. We believe that. But our unity isn't just a matter of what we believe. It is also based on what we do. We come together around a common God-given purpose in order to accomplish things together in the power of God that we could never do alone. Never could do it by ourselves. Nor could we do it without God's help. The Apostle Paul puts this perfectly in the Bible where he describes the church as being a body that's made up of different parts or different members. Each one different, each one unique, but each one making a contribution to the common good. The truth is, none of us is complete in and of himself or herself. I need you guys. And we need one another. We complement one another. Our differences actually make us better. We need each other if we are going to be the best that we can be. And if you're trying to be a Christian, or you're just trying to live your life by yourself, you're missing out. Because none of us is that good. But all of us together, that's something. That's why we find all of these one another commandments in the New Testament, where it says, accept one another, encourage one another, instruct one another, serve one another, forgive one another, pray for one another, be kind and considerate to one another, love one another. That's why we find all of these plural pronouns in the Bible. When Jesus is asked, Lord, will you teach us to pray? Listen to all the plural pronouns. When you pray, say this, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us, not me, give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not. All this plural stuff. We find all these plurals in the Apostle Paul. We find it today in our reading from Hebrews. Let us run with perseverance or endurance the race that is set before us. The truth is, we were made for community. Even though we're different, even though we're unique, we were made for community. And in community, we are better together. So today is a day to celebrate our history It is a day to demonstrate our unity. And finally, it is a day to dedicate our legacy. You know, when a person dies, he or she is going to leave behind two things. One is an inheritance. The other is a legacy. Now, you may or you may not leave much of an estate to those who survive you. But every single one of us here today is going to leave a legacy. The question is, what kind of legacy are we going to leave? December 2000 issue of Fast Company magazine carried an article. It's a business article. It's called How to Make Your Mark. It made an interesting point. It said, sooner or later, in one way or another, most of us will look back over our life and wonder, what is my legacy? Ultimately, it said, making your mark means making a contribution. Making your mark means making a contribution. One of the things that I can say with absolute certainty about StoneBridge Community Church is this: we want to make a contribution. We want God to use us. We want to make a difference. We want to help people find freedom and hope. We want to serve the poor. We want to make a difference. This is why we have offered things like the Alpha program and Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. It's why last week we hosted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families at our Christmas shop. It's why we have offered recovery programs, sent missionaries around the world, why our congregation was one of the congregations that helped to launch and has consistently supported the work of the PADS Homeless program. And it is why we continue through the Christmas offering, for instance, to support the Samaritan Center, the Community Pregnancy Center, and Sarah's House, to just mention a few. It's also why week after week, week in and week out, we offer 3 worship services, why we offer Sunday school and youth programs and small groups. And it is also why we've seen some changes over the years. This week I was talking, it was Wednesday morning, I was talking to Grace Hughes, whom we recognized earlier, one of our charter members, and I asked her a question, and her answer floored me. I asked her, what would you say have been the highlights of the past 50 years? And like I said, her answer at first surprised me, and then it didn't. What would you say have been the highlights of the past 50 years, Grace? And Grace said, the changes have been fantastic. Grace Hughes. The reason I want to highlight that is this. You would think that if anybody had an investment in things being what they were in the good old days, it would be somebody who was here in 1963. Am I right? That's what you would think, but think again. Because if you think that, you don't know how this church started. It's summer 1963. Fred Wills is pounding a sign in the ground at Cochran Street announcing the first worship service. A kid pulls up on a bicycle. He says, "Are you guys going to have a vacation Bible school?" During the first worship service, the one where Fred disappeared and then reemerged, during the first worship service, Dr. Will says, "What about it, you guys? I want to do a vacation Bible school." 2 weeks later, Grace and a bunch of other folks have a 2-week-long vacation Bible school in which they wrote their own curriculum. And she and we have never stopped doing mission and outreach and serving our community and the world. It started back then, summer of '63, and it continues today. And I think that's why Grace shouldn't have surprised me when she said what she said, that the changes have been fantastic because all of those changes are, in a way, a dream come true because almost every single one of them has been in the service of ministry and caring for people in need and reaching out to those in our community. Now, we're going to continue to make adjustments in how we do ministry. It's just going to happen. Case in point, for as long as I have known Grace, Grace has been on me about getting her a welcome kiosk. And when she didn't get it anywhere with me, she got on other people about it. Well, Grace, at long last, starting next month, we are going to be beginning some improvements to our patio that are going to include an awesome welcome center called The Hub. Happy anniversary! And not only is it going to serve as an all-weather welcome center, it is going to be kind of our communication and resource center and the first step in the discipleship process for people who come onto our campus. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be a mess while we build it. So I love you guys. Thank you for your patience. Now, there is a really, really wonderful verse, and I have to admit, it is one of the weirdest and most obscure verses in the Bible, but I absolutely love this verse. It's Proverbs chapter 14, verse 4. It says, "Where there are no oxen, the manger is empty. But with the strength of an ox comes an abundant harvest." And some of you are thinking, Pastor Jeff, what spiritual meaning do you possibly find in this thing? I'm going to repeat it. "Where there are no oxen, the manger is empty, but with the strength of an ox comes abundant harvest." I think this is just massively brilliant verse. It's basically saying, you get a choice. You can have clean stalls, or you can have a working farm, but you can't have both. If it's tidy you're after, you don't want to harvest. If you want to harvest, expect some mess, maybe even some smell. You know what? When a church is doing what it's called to do, things get messy. Read the book of Acts. It's a mess. It's a glorious mess. It's a God-given mess, but it's a mess. You know, all these folks are trying to figure out, how can we invite all these Gentiles into the church? They don't do stuff the way we do, and it's all weird, and what does God think of this and all that? When the church is doing what it's supposed to do and what it's always done from the very beginning, things get messy. And not only can things get messy, it gets weird. You've probably never heard a pastor say this. Don't you love it when I preface something I'm about to say with that? But one of the things that we need to do as a church family, if we're going to be useful to God, is we need to welcome the weirdness. Welcome the weirdness. And I don't hear as many applauses for that, as many claps. But you heard me right. Welcome the weirdness. When we started Celebrate Recovery, when we started Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, when we started the Alpha course for this church, guess who started showing up? People dealing with addictions. Folks struggling with their personal finances. People coming with questions about the Bible or spiritual stuff. And you know what? I loved it, and I love it, and I hope you love it too. And because not only did they start showing up, they started bringing their friends, and it got even weirder. Have there been challenges? Absolutely. Have they been worth it? Absolutely. Absolutely. And here's the thing. The thing is, whatever we do as human beings, whatever we do as a church, we're going to have problems. When did we start expecting that things would be perfect? In our own lives, in our own families, in the church, in government. They're never going to be perfect. We live in a fallen world. That's why Jesus came, because God knows we're never going to be perfect. We're always going to have problems. But what I want you to know is that the problems that come from welcoming people that come with all of their hurts and all of their hang-ups and all of their questions and all of their concerns and all of their issues and all of their brokenness and all of their needs, the problems that come with those kind of people are way better than the problems that come with a church that's plateauing and declining because it doesn't give a rip and it's not doing anything. We want to be a church that welcomes that kind of folks. It's all about leaving a legacy. It's all about leaving a legacy of values, a legacy of wisdom, a legacy of character, a legacy of faith, and most of all, a legacy of love. In the end, that is what matters most in the world. Love. When Jesus was asked, what is the first and greatest commandment? He had the whole Old Testament to work with, and he could have chosen anything. And what he does is identify this. He says, the first and greatest commandment is this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And a second is like it. He said, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love launched the history we celebrate. Love is at the center of the unity that we demonstrate. Love is the legacy that by God's grace we will leave behind when we are gone. Real, authentic, long-term, invested, sacrificial, costly, covenant love. That's what StoneBridge Community Church is all about. It's been 50 years, and we are just getting started. So today, let's thank God. Let's thank God, first of all, for who He is, and for what He has done, and for what He is doing, and for His Son, Jesus Christ, whose birth we celebrate this week, and for this community of faith where we have come to see that the church is more, a lot more, than a place to go on a Sunday morning. It's a community that has received a heritage of love. And above all else, wants to leave a legacy of love behind. So thanks be to God. Thank you, StoneBridge Community Church. Let's pray. Gracious